I just spilled coffee on myself. Of course I did. Lovely. Hello friends, I'm doing something a little different today. This video was actually requested on my return to YouTube video, and that is my favorite video games. So it actually took me a little bit to come up with this list, and they're in no particular order because please don't ask me to rank them. So without further ado, let me get into it. So the first game I'm gonna talk about is one that I think I sunk probably like 70 plus hours in, and most of that was just from the main story alone, and that is The Witcher 3, which I know probably would make a lot of people's lists because it is an amazing game. It was the first game in the Witcher installment I played, and I was a little hesitant going into the game because of that. I didn't really know anything about the story. It was before I read the books, and I was like, I don't know about this, but it is such a gripping game, and you can definitely hop into it without having played the other games. You might be a little confused at first, but it does a good job of kind of recapping previous events without, this is what happened in this game, this is what happened then. So it's kind of organically integrated, and it is just such a fun game to play. Basically, you play as Geralt, who is a Witcher, who is a genetically modified person whose sole purpose is to exist as a monster hunter, essentially. They make ghouls, witches, geists, and all sorts of other like creepy creatures disappear. They fight them, and they're both revered in that sense because of what they do, but also feared and hated because they're not human, technically, because they are genetically modified. And it is just such an interesting series. The main story is really gripping. You're trying to hunt down and find your, I guess, pseudo daughter. She's not really your daughter, but you know what I mean. You're trying to find someone, but there's so many side stories and so many side quests that are just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the main story. And it really keeps you engaged from the beginning. And then the DLCs, especially Blood and Wine, are just fantastic. That game alone, or that DLC alone, is massive. I don't think I actually finished it, and I just really want to replay this game. It is one of my favorites by far, and if I had to pick a favorite, that might be number one. So the second game I'm going to talk about is a little bit cheaty because it's actually two games. And that is Fallout 3 / Fallout New Vegas. And I am choosing both because I could not pick one, and I love them both for different reasons. So Fallout 3 was my introduction to the Fallout series, which I know it was for a lot of people because it was very different from the previous games in that it became a first-person shooter, and the previous games were like, I don't remember what it's called, but it's above, where you it's more strategy based than first person, and I fell in love with it really quickly. It introduced me to this. It's a post-apocalyptic game, basically. This first Fallout 3 takes place 200 years after the Great War, which is a war that kind of engulfed the entire world in nuclear fire, specifically China and the United States. And the world that took place before the Great War was one in which the transistor was never discovered, and so it relied on nuclear power instead. So it is perpetually, even though the Great War happened in 2077, it is perpetually stuck in the 50s. So as you're exploring this post-apocalyptic world, it's basically like the 50s stuck in time, and this game was just so gripping. The main story was all right. It wasn't my favorite aspect, but there was so much to explore and learn about. Even if you weren't talking to other characters, you would uncover what had happened right before the bombs fell and things like that. So, and what was fascinating to me at the time is this game really truly shows you that regardless of circumstances, human nature will always prevail, and that won't necessarily be a good thing. This game forces you to choose a lot of morally gray options, and options that you think are going to go well but don't. I love it so much because of that. So the story of this one is basically you leave a vault, which were safe havens for the lucky chosen to enter when the bombs fell, who would survive and repopulate the earth essentially. So the vault you escape from is one that was never meant to be opened. Your father opens it and escapes, and so you trail after him and trying to kind of figure out what's going on there. But there is so much more in this game, and you meet a lot of interesting characters. And like I said, because it was my introduction of the series, I just love it so much. In the same vein, New Vegas is all in all a better game than 3, and I will agree there. It has a richer story, it has better characters, better voice acting. The story itself is written better, and it just also included some mechanics that are better, like iron sights and modding and things like that, or like modding your weapons in the game rather. And it's so good. And Old World Blues is my favorite DLC probably of any game so far, because it cracked me up. I just absolutely loved it the first time I played it, and I love it now when I replay it, and it's great. This series is great. Those 2 games are fantastic. Kind of goes downhill from there, but you know, that's a different video. But I just absolutely love both of those games, and I could not choose one. So the next game I'm gonna choose is one I think I have talked about before, and it's a little different than the previous games I've mentioned, and that is The Forest, which I played when it was in beta. I think it's officially released now. I've played it both on the PC for the longest time, and then when it got released on the PS4, I've played it on that as well. And this is a survival horror game, which I know there are a ton of at this point. I believe it was one of the first, it just didn't get as popular as the others. And it is so interesting and creepy, and there are so many different aspects to the game. So basically you crash on this island. You're traveling with your son and you guys crash, and the game kind of starts with like a cutscene where after you crash, you see your son laying in the middle of the aisle in the plane, and a man, the red man, because he's painted in literal red paint, picks your son up and you're crawling towards him, and then he leaves with your son. So like in many other games, you're trying to find your son, and it kind of picks up from there. So what I like about this game is that you can play it in many different ways. If you don't even care about your son, you don't even want to do that, it is genuinely a survival game. You have to build, you have to hunt, you have to worry about your health, you have to worry about hunger, thirst, you have to worry about being cold, you have to worry about having fire, etc. Like, it is genuinely a survival game in that aspect, but also there are a lot of creepy things on this island. For example, the main enemies are tribes of cannibals, and they vary in how human they are. None of them talk. They just make a lot of really creepy, groany, grunty noises. And then you have the most human of them, which, you know, they walk bipedally, they look like people, they're just aggressive. And then you have the not so human ones that run on all fours, ones that are naked but are like Ken dolls and taller and stronger than a normal person. And then you have the actual mutants, which are abominations and grotesque and hard to kill. So not only are you trying to survive, but you have those attacking you. They're not friendly in any way. And then most of the story takes place in a cave system. So if you've seen The Descent, it's very similar in a lot of ways. But what I really enjoy about the story is that nothing is given to you. You have to find everything on your own. There are little like story items you can find here and there, and you just try to piece together what happens, and the ultimate story is actually very sad. I have not finished the game fully since it was released officially, so I don't know what has changed versus the beta. So if you guys know, just give me a DM or like private message me in some way so we don't spoil it, and let me know, because it was genuinely like a heart-wrenching, sad ending, and it wasn't what I was expecting whatsoever, but that just made the game that much better, and it's such a good game. I've put many, many hours into it. And finally, the game I want to mention is the Sims series, but especially The Sims 3. That is the one that I have played the most of recently. I've played The Sims 4, and in a lot of ways I like it. I like that there's a little, it feels a little more real. There's more you can do in terms of your Sims and interacting, and the way, my cat's just gonna meow in the background, I guess, and the way they interact with other Sims and their wants and their emotions. But it just pales in comparison to 3 for me. Although 3, they look a little more doughy, like fake looking, there's just the amount of care I feel like was put into that game versus 4, whereas 4 didn't even have pools or toddlers or anything like that when it came out. But I feel like in a lot of ways 3 is a much better game, and I'm gonna stick to that, and I love it. I've loved the Sims franchise from the beginning, and this game was no exception. So yeah, it's one that I don't necessarily play all the time, but when I revisit it, I get hooked and play it for a few months at a time, like obsessively. So yeah, those are my favorite games. I'm sure if I think about it harder, I can come up with some more, but those are the ones I have come up with for now. I can probably make a separate list of all the games that I adore, that are nostalgic for me, that I played a lot of when I was young, and some of them I still play now. So if that's something you guys are interested in, just let me know. Otherwise, I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye!